but otherwise, like I can.
Live streaming is on.
Yeah, that thing is so jarring every time.
Yeah, so we'll wrap around like 11:30 my time because I'm East Coast, so but should be chill. Yeah.
Sweet. I didn't know about the Art Tech House thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been like about a year almost. I worked with them earlier than that a little bit, but I guess it's just been like one of those things I haven't made exceptionally like public because I kind of want to keep my sketching practice sort of separate from it for various reasons. So
Right.
I just kind of like work there, but don't make a huge deal about it. Plus, it's better that way for, I think, various reasons. Just like people will reach out to me just because I work there, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like, yeah, I already get enough of people reaching out. So
yeah,
it's good.
Yeah. How do you handle that? Actually, I mean, maybe we could talk about this later. But I'm also experiencing that. Definitely in a much higher volume since doing the daily stuff, and I don't know. It's kind of weird. Like sometimes I feel like a dick, just either like kind of ignoring it because I just don't have like bandwidth, or kind of just like having to say no constantly. Like
saying no constantly is something we could talk about for sure. That's like a very important conversation. But so like when I say no, and I think that there are different approaches. Like some people just won't reply to anybody, and I try to reply to people who are like seem to be reaching out to me in good faith. So and it's not in insane volume, so it's something where I usually just like might let something get backed up over a couple weeks, and then I'll spend like 10 minutes or 15 minutes replying to like a bunch of people just being like, I'm busy, but thanks for reaching out, or whatever whatever it is.
That sounds pretty close to how I do it too. It's like, okay, these are piling up now, I got to deal with this.
I think it's changed since I've been working full time too, where I don't have the ability to really do any of these projects, where like otherwise I might actually pursue a few of them depending on what they were.
Hey, Sam. Wait.
Do you usually start on the dot, or do you wait a little bit for folks to roll in?
Usually give it a few minutes. Just people are usually like roll in for the first like 5-10. So
Cool.
especially I guess with the shorter presentation, that could be missing the whole presentation.
Yeah. I mean, I could talk forever, but I'd rather open it up sooner.
Yeah.
So, yeah, cool.
Me too. Oh no, my Facebook link is mangled. I hope everyone noticed the note that we're starting a little early tonight. I tried to write it multiple times.
That's smart. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Instructions, OTFM.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Yeah, no, we're not 100% consistent with that, so it's cool to move it around a bit. And I'm doing all right. How's Sam doing?
Yeah, hanging in there. Yeah, trying to keep my head and my shoulders, and just plug through every day.
You have any fun projects going on?
I am having a huge amount of fun with Generate still.
Sweet.
And we've got a H4 touchscreen thing coming up, which is not particularly fun, but keeping things moving. I'm loving the AR stuff you're pregnant.
Oh yeah, thanks. It's been fun messing around with it. Even though I'm under the thumb of Lord Zuckerberg while I do it in Spark AR, it's still interesting to play with.
You ever look into the Unreal workflow for that kind of stuff?
Sort of. I'll have to look at it again, but at least for the daily stuff, I appreciate how I can literally just plug in my phone to USB and send my Spark AR sketch and run it like instantly without having to mess around with like building a phone app or something. So I don't know if Unreal is quite there yet. So
I gotcha.
I'll have to check it out though. And also, hi everyone showing up.
Yeah, I've been sort of thought about jumping into the Spark stuff. Haven't quite dived yet, but I feel like I still end up just like being consumed with Touch Designer, which is surprising that I'd be like consumed with one piece of software for so long. But it's like, whenever you have a limit, you're like, well, let's just go deeper into GLSL, or let's go deeper into, write a C++ operator for it, and there's not really an end.
You could do just about anything with that, right?
Yeah. But then then you're just like, well, you could just be working in open frameworks, right? Essentially, it's like all just what you can think and make happen once you get to that point. But I still like the modular process for sure.
So one of the things that I like about Spark is that the programming in it is all node-based as well. So it's definitely very different from what you do in Touch Designer, but you know, a lot of times you can translate things a little easier than going to like straight text-based scripting.
That's nice. Yeah, I've always been like a little more comfy in those environments, being like someone who kind of came from like Max MSP and like kind of I've done some stuff in the text only, but I just work so much faster in like the Node environments. In some cases, though.
Yeah.
With Unreal, I actually wish that I jumped into C++ because the blueprints really, I got stuck over and over again.
Oh, really?
When I first tried, I mean, that was like probably 5 years ago or 4 years ago,
Right.
like when they just came out too, and I wasn't as experienced at that point either. But yeah, I would be like, I want to do like something that I could do with a couple nested for loops, and like then it's nodes, and I'm like, I don't what. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing with node-based programming is like you can only, once you get to a certain level of complexity, it's really diminishing returns. That's what I found anyway.
And
Yeah.
well, welcome everyone who's just showing up. We're just gonna give a couple more minutes for the like late stragglers to show up, and we'll have a short presentation from Simon, and we're gonna have a chat.
Yep.
I think we'll shoot for like 6:40. Like a few more minutes.
Cool. Sounds good. Be right back. Get some more water.
No problem.
No, your presence in front of the screen is mandatory. Hey, Omar, how's it going, bud?
I think he said his mic's not working. Oh, maybe it is.
Hello, hello, hello.
Wow, it's working. Nice.
Okay, I just refreshed the tab, and I guess that's why the live streaming restarted. I mean, it didn't really
Awesome.
restart; it just lost them. Yeah, it's working. Okay.
Whoever manages to like finally do away with the like, oh, my mic's not working problem on these calls is going to be a millionaire.
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg himself drills a mic right in here.
No, I was watching an interview with Elon Musk. I think it was yesterday, or today's morning, and during the interview just started, and he started talking, and then the interviewer said like, "Mr. Elon, I think your mic is muted," and you were like, "Oh, yes, it is."
Happens to the best of them, right?
Definitely.
Okay, so we're about 10 minutes in. There's probably still going to be stragglers rolling in. We had quite a few RSVPs, so maybe they'll all be here in like an hour. But yeah, we should get going. So I saw a lot of new names, and some of you guys are showing up as fellow Jitsiers, so I'm going to assume that maybe there's some first timers in here. So welcome. This is Vancouver Creative Technology. So if you haven't been, the idea of this meetup is kind of a platform for people who use technology for creative expression. So that's intentionally a bit broad because we want to, include and support like lots of different disciplines from, like creative code to filmmaking and kind of like lots of stuff in between. Really, it's just about trying to create a place for like-minded folks or people who are just curious about, this type of creative practice to hang out and, maybe like cross-pollinate, inspire each other, maybe make some connections. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're about. We've been going for almost 6 years now. And so what we're currently doing is a bit more of a discussion format. So we've been experimenting a bit, tried a few different ways of approaching this. And since moving to all online, we're going for more of a discussion format. So we have our guest, Simon, with us today. And so the idea is that Simon will give us a short presentation about his work, and that will kind of give us a starting point for a conversation that everyone can join in on. And so it's less of like a lecture style presentation and more something that everyone can be involved with. And if you don't already, if you want to follow us on social media, I posted links in the chat for our Slack, our Facebook, and Instagram. Keep up with when we'll be, having our next meetups. There's always lots of discussion on our Slack as well, just kind of people making connections for projects and asking questions and stuff. So it's a good place. It's a good resource for that as well. Yeah, so I guess that's it for my sort of introduction. I guess just sort of housekeeping general is just, if you're not talking, please try to keep your mic muted. Keep everyone else's ears feeling happy. And so, yeah, I guess I'll hand it over to Simon for a short presentation about his work.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I didn't really know this was a thing, so hopefully I can stop in occasionally from time to time. But yeah, I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but my name is Simon Alexander Adams. I work with, I think of myself as kind of a multimedia artist working with specifically like in the intersection of music and visual art and kind of technology, but more and more I've been doing more of like the interactive media with like specifically visuals. And so I came from a music background and sort of moved more towards the visual side, but I still am a practitioner in the music realm as well. But yeah, let me share my screen. I'll talk a little bit about what I do, and then we can move on to a broader discussion. So let's see. I'm gonna move things around here. Okay, so yeah, yes, like I said, this is my website. Just so you can, I'm going to jump between this and another view. So one thing that has been important to my practice is daily sketching, which we'll talk about a little bit, and I know that Tim does this as well. So specifically, like I started almost 3 years ago, creating daily kind of like interactive works or generative art in Touch Designer. So this is like the tool. Touch Designer is my tool of choice that I've been working with for about 5 years now, maybe 5 or 6. And when I say like generative art, I'm thinking a lot of people might have some background in this already, but sort of like leveraging some kind of randomness usually or pseudo randomness to create works that hopefully are sort of like unpredictable in some way to me. Like I like trying to find surprises. So these are like examples of some of my sketches that I've created in Touch Designer. So these are actually kind of like earlier, so we'll go kind of to newer ones. And a couple of things that I'm really interested in are like complex systems. So I found like reaction diffusion like 3-ish, 4-ish years ago. This is like the top middle is an example of that, which is like a simulation of chemicals diffusing. And I've been sort of here and there, I'll dive in and find sort of different sort of ways of simulating this. And there's like different levels of complexity and so forth. But I really like the way that it creates these kind of unpredictable and organic patterns. And for me, I really like finding sort of like organic and unpredictable textures through code. That's kind of like always been something I've looked for, is like how can I find, again, like ways to be surprised through something that is deterministic, like code, which is purely deterministic, right? But how can you find things that feel natural? Because I'm also always have been really inspired by the natural world and like sort of patterns that you can find in nature. And so it's all like, how can we get that to happen in the computer? So fluid simulations, cellular automata. So the bottom right couple in the middle, both use sort of these kinds of cellular systems, which would be examples of complex systems. So more of those here too. Like you'll see that like a lot of these examples also use reaction diffusion and cellular automata. So in different ways, whether or not it's apparent, it might be to drive the motion, or it might be just explicitly that. But those are things that I like to find new ways to use. Again, these are all like from my daily sketches, which I, every day I'll post something online, which has been important in a lot of ways, and we can talk more about like that process. But I think for me, it's been a twofold sort of like benefit, where one part of it was that when I first started, I wanted to be better at the software. So doing it every day is like a way to force. It's like similar to practicing an instrument, right? If you don't do it every day, you sort of don't keep getting sharper and getting experience. So it was just finding an excuse for me to keep using a software that I was interested in mastering. But the other benefit that kind of came from it was just like unintentionally, but I guess this is when people say, social media is important, is it ended up finding a lot of opportunities where people would find my work, and then I would have opportunities to do sort of interactive installations or kind of music video type work, sort of things that go beyond just my sketches on Instagram. So, like, for instance, this is like an invitation I had to create content for like a series of digital artworks that were shown in Times Square. I guess it's gonna, there we go. So like that was sort of a surprise that showed up in my inbox, but it kind of happened through, putting my work out there every day and consistently, which was, very exciting among other things. Another thing that, one thing I can't get out of the daily sketching, and it's something that like really all of my posts do, is this sort of real-time aspect where the content renders in real time, and you can add sort of interactive inputs like a camera, for instance. So here's a reaction diffusion based visual that's being driven by a Kinect camera. It's actually not even using any of the fancy depth camera. It's just so that I don't have conflicts with my webcam, right? But basically just kind of using some motion from the camera to push this system around. And I really like this kind of simple interaction, but I also just really enjoy interactive installation art and making it and like seeing people explore it. So that's also like a lot of my posts that I put online and through my daily practice are real time, and some of them are interactive. And so, I look for then kind of other opportunities as well to present this in physical spaces, which, it's been harder lately with things being shut down more. But yeah, that's generally where I like to see this happen. Our live performances with musicians or like in a physical space with sensors is kind of where I like to push my work. So that kind of brings me to installation art, which is something that a lot of these actually examples here are older, mostly because of the way that, at least in my practice, my documentation lags a little bit, 1 or 2 years almost at this point, because I'm very behind. But here's here's one. This is actually the first project I did with Art Tech House, and I'll talk about that later because I work with them now full time. But this was one at Coachella, which used 3 scrims and a top-down connect to create this kind of like interactive photo op. So you see people who are posting on Instagram doing like sort of funny stuff. And so there were a few different sort of interactions here. So that was like an exciting opportunity to work kind of at that scale, which was sort of a first thing for me, kind of, or I was kind of breaking into that level of work. Some earlier stuff too. This was Electric Forest at in Michigan. So I'm in Detroit, Michigan, actually. So this was like only a few hours drive. It's an electronic music festival that has sort of like, it's out in the forest, in the woods outside. So all of like the installations and the interactive content have to be like waterproofed and weatherproofed. And it actually like, this was kind of embedded in a tree stump looking thing. Used a couple cameras for the interaction. And it was pretty intense because it actually like thunderstormed that weekend. So we had to tarp the whole thing down, and like a couple people's projectors got destroyed by lightning storms. So it was kind of a early sort of experience in like making things really people-proof and weatherproof, but exciting as well. And an even earlier one, this is actually the same year, but like as I was just kind of like breaking into sort of these self-produced installations at the Ann Arbor Film Festival. So a few examples of kind of like my installation work. Another one that just sort of uses, this one's called Silhouettes 1 through 4. So it's really working with Kinect camera to create kind of just like interactive projections. So some of these like more reaction diffusion is something that I've like just kind of come back to a lot. I really like working with that kind of organic patterns, the obligatory like particles that move with you, and more like also cellular automata, which we can talk about like what that is, but these sort of like simulations that I find kind of create some complex and interesting patterns. So yeah, that's just like a really kind of jumping through this quickly survey of some of my work. For the last year or so, I've also been working with Art Tech House full time, and it's so I don't have like visual documentation of this per se, but there's a lot on their website and Instagram. But I had the opportunity to work on Hanami, which was a pretty like interesting experience that was translating illustrations from Yuko Shimizu, who's like a Japanese American illustrator, and like translating them to these like interactive projections on a larger scale. And I also recently, this one just opened last month, did a lot of work for Crystalline, which is their like current installation open in DC. So in addition to this like main space with a table that's projection mapped and has sensors, and like there's a LiDAR sensor that we got to work with for this that was kind of capturing like the whole space. So it's, always like working with new sensors and at like higher scales or larger scales, which has been kind of an exciting opportunity for me. So that's where my work has sort of taken me in the last year. But yeah, that's kind of where a little bit about my work and kind of what I do in a nutshell. So yeah, I guess we can open it up at this point to the larger discussion, questions, anything like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon.
Mm-hmm.
That Artex house stuff looks really exciting. I have some other questions here, but I'm kind of curious what your role there looks like. Are you working on like kind of control systems for implementing this work?
It's a small team. So I'll say that like Hanami and Crystalline, I pretty much did all of it. All other than like the instant, like for instance in Hanami, the actual touch designer development and like include like so the systems and the kind of animation and interaction were basically like all on me. Like I have there's creative folks who I'm working with to make this happen in more like directorial roles. But right now it's a small enough team that like I'm sort of the first full-time interactive media developer they hired. So it's basically just like a lot. And I mean, I've had to sort of like, I think that this is just like candidly work with a sort of like, okay, I'm not working for somewhere like Leviathan or Obscura or Moment Factory where they have like hundreds of people, or at Moment Factory, for instance, they have like 400, right? At like Leviathan or Obscura, it's a smaller team, but you still have like a bunch of people. So it's like if you need to tap someone to do like some Houdini work, you can do that. And like, it's just like more of it's a smaller team, so it felt actually a lot more like me doing independent installations on my own, but just bigger, and certainly more like support, right? So, I do get to now relegate my work to just only like the inside the computer work, as opposed to having to do like the physical builds and the fabrication and like all of that, So it's definitely like a full-on collaboration. But as far as the tech side, so far it's mostly been me, and sometimes like outsourcing some help here and there. So yeah. So anyway, that's yeah.
Yeah, sounds fun.
Mm-hmm.
Small teams can be nice sometimes. You're not managing people all the time.
Yeah, right. Like, so yeah, I appreciate. I do really like the people I'm working with, and like the kind of like even within the sort of structures, like, there's a lot of creative freedom. So I'm not necessarily like getting something that's like make X, right? It's like, here's the problem we need to solve. Let's find like something we can create that does this, right? So even with like, Hanami, which, I had a lot of assets to work with, but like how we animated those and like the compositions and sort of the interactions, those were all sort of things that I got to sort of work on and flesh out and like dialogue with the team and figure out. And so, I think that's rewarding to me, is like the opportunity to really like, because at the end of the day, I like being sort of more in the driver's seat in that regard, as opposed to like, and it's also partly my skill set. Like, I'm not somebody who is great at like faithfully reproducing a specific look, but I enjoy finding sort of like interesting outcomes through exploration. And so that's just my approach creatively, most like, so it works. Yeah. Cool.
I have some questions here to kind of like kick off discussion, but just from the presentation, does anyone have any questions for Simon?
Can you tell us more about the LiDAR sensors?
A little bit, yeah, sure. So like,
I was going to ask exactly the same, so that's a good one.
I mean, without going into too much detail, the one we worked with, because there's different types, right? Some of them give you like the Ryoku. I don't know, I'm saying maybe it wrong, but those ones give you like one sort of ring, right? It's like a spinning sensor. But the one we worked with had essentially that, but times like 32. I think it was 32 vertical. So you basically get like a point cloud of the space that you're working with. So it's similar to like a Connect depth map, like point cloud, right? But it's radial, so you just get like a much larger and higher definition space. I think that the biggest challenge is not visualizing that, because it's pretty easy to say draw a dot at the XYZ position, right? The harder part is making it interactive. And I will say that like I definitely hit some challenges where, when I'm basically diving through papers and people are writing about like using these on autonomous vehicles, and like, I'm, as much as I like go through work in this stuff, there's still a fair amount of the like the sort of math that goes over my head, reading sort of these engineering and like math papers. So, I'm not someone who also can just like implement these things. I work more from like, I think the like creative side, I don't think that was phrased wrong, but I work more from like the visual side maybe than the engineering side. And so, so yeah, that was definitely like a challenge, but I think I've like, I don't know, came across some interesting techniques. Yeah, I think that another challenge too is like taking a 3-dimensional space of points and like figuring out how to map that to these like 3 walls, right? Like when you're standing in this wall, do you show up here or do you show up on the front? Like, how do you like that kind of mapping? I've gone through like a few iterations in that space, depending on where the LiDAR is positioned and so forth. And there's a lot of challenges too. I think with any sensor, right, there's like different challenges. And with that one, occlusion of people like standing in the space and blocking others, right, is the big one, because if you're standing in front of the sensor, it's like kind of like blocks more and more as it kind of radiates out from one point. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really cool challenge. I mean, that's another exciting thing about working like for a larger company is like, I normally wouldn't have access to that type of sensor. It's just like unless I worked with a project with like a high budget, which, I think many of us do sometimes. But like, as an individual, I wasn't at the point where I could just like buy a LiDAR sensor of that quality when I started working for them. So it's kind of a cool opportunity to say like, okay, I don't have to worry about the budgeting because that's not something I'm excited about. I don't have to worry about, like various things like exchange a little bit of like freedom, I guess, when you do a full-time gig. But yeah.
Just a quick follow up. Did you find interfacing those into Touch Designer? Like, was that kind of turnkey, or was that?
With Touch, it was. I mean, we specifically went with the OS 1, which has support already. So actually, Dylan. God, what's his last? I'm blanking on his last name, but he's out in California. I think I talked with him because he actually was like the one who his company sort of had touched like the derivative ad support, right? Because that's sort of their model is like if you have a big project, you can pay derivative to add support to Touch Designer. So it was like a really fresh operator. Like that one hadn't been around that long, and it was a little tricky getting it set up because I'm also not like a network person, and it needed some like very specific networking to get the sort of like IP address connected and stuff. So that was like a little bit of research, but yeah, I mean, once it's in, it just like gives you a point cloud in
Nice.
so it's really awesome. And like, I mean, then the biggest problem, like I said, is like figuring out what to do with it. But yeah.
Cool, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Like,
what about just follow up on that? What about using LiDAR for creating touchable walls? Like not actually like 3D scanning, but just use it for as a vertical threshold where you like touch a wall, like big surfaces.
yeah, I do know like that process. I mean, I haven't done like a touch wall like it, but I mean, I know that specifically like Touch Designer has the like the Ryoku input, which is that's like the flat plane. So you could place one above the wall, and then it also has like a blob tracking system, which I've done a little bit with, which like does a pretty good job actually giving you blobs for it'll like take the X, Y, Z, the Cartesian inputs from your LiDAR and like give you multi-touch points from the LiDAR. So Touch is actually like pretty well equipped for that, which I thought was pretty cool. We almost used one of those for like a floor blob tracking thing. Actually, this is like some like I found that haze doesn't work with Kinects or LiDAR specifically well. It like totally throws off their depth cameras if you haze the space too much. So it was one of those, oh, well, we can't do the Kinect. Let's try the LiDAR. Oh, the LiDAR doesn't work? Okay. Like, guess it's not going to be interactive. But beyond that, like, but yeah, to your point, I think like this instance was a little like different because it gives you, it's like placed in the center or the back, and it gives you like the room. So you could make the walls interactive if you just looked at like the data along the walls. If you kind of isolated that, then yeah, I think you could make that portion interactive with that type of sensor. But I think like if the OS 1 we were playing with is like, it gives you like a huge 3D point cloud, right? Beyond, instead of just like a plane that you break, which is like, they're different applications, I think. But I just, yeah, I think that the kind of like quality of like the large, like once they give you the high resolution in multiple like levels, because it angles out in a cone, right? So yeah, it's like totally
Would you
different.
recommend that using that instead of like something like an IR frame or something else, or just a camera for touching surfaces? Would you say LiDAR it's a good solution for that, or it's better to just go the easy way with a built-in frame or like traditional IR cameras?
I think it just depends on your budget and like, because it's like this one is like not cheap, So I think it's like if you can get away with like I think that LiDAR could work well for like a wall kind of thing, like you mentioned. And there's like lower price points for that. If you want like the entire room, then depends on how many walls you have. I don't know. It's kind of a specific thing to like project to project, but I'm a big fan of like, honestly, like when I can, I just like using like IR cameras. Like I really like the just like, even just like a webcam with like optical flow, I think can be like as effective or more effective than something else. It's more complicated depending on how you like the space and the context. But I don't know. Again, space and context. It's like kind of what you're working with.
I'd say try the cheaper options first. Like you could try webcam stuff for like $100, right? And then if that doesn't work, if it works, you might save yourself a couple grand on LiDAR.
Right. Or like there are cheaper LiDAR stuff. Like I haven't gotten it up and running yet because I didn't want to dive too, like it was sort of one of these like, I didn't want to write a bunch of either Arduino or C++ to get it like implemented. It's not like necessarily my forte, but I have like a cheap like RP LiDAR sensor that was like $100, $200 or something, So if you like have that experience with like Arduino or, want to take like an SDK and play with it, that's like a really cheap, like something that you could probably use if you get it up and running, would be a cost-effective way to do it too, depending on the budget. And it's tiny. It's like, a little like not too expensive, but also, then you also have the quality to balance. Like, well, can my installation handle something that might break? But yeah, anyway.
Okay, I think I'm gonna throw in some like less technical, more like zoom out a little bit on generative art.
Oh yeah.
I was thinking about what's the role of randomness in generative art, and I found a quote to go along with that one. So by Paul Bley: "Practice makes perfect. Imperfect is better."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have like various thoughts about randomness. I think I kind of like, I don't know where this quote comes from, but like this idea of like the role in generative art as like shepherding randomness. I don't know if anyone's come across that kind of concept, but like you sort of have this like source that's, it's a certain point, it becomes kind of predictable. Like you kind of get to know Perlin noise and simplex noise, right? So that you're like familiar with the places that it can go. Even it's like kind of becomes predictable. And in a way, like not random. And same, I think, for any of these systems, which is like the challenge for me with generative art, is like even with something like cellular automata or reaction diffusion, there's still a limit to like how unpredictable it ends up being, which is kind of like the upside and the downside. It's like you can kind of work with it and sculpt it more if you can predict it, but when it's also has a limit to its unpredictability, it can't truly surprise you often. I think that's like the hardest part, is like how making something that really like you're like, whoa, did not expect that to happen. And those moments happen through experimentation and through noise and randomness. But yeah, I think it's always a challenge for me. Like I think, and a balance between sort of control and sort of like letting go. I lost the antonym, but I had one. That's fair. But yeah, like, so I don't know. It's important, but at a certain point, it also becomes kind of like a tool to grab, because I don't know. There's also other ways of creating unpredictability. Of course, are like interaction from people, which is going to be like far more unpredictable than anything I could probably code, right? And so that's also why I really like the interactive input from like people and cameras and sensors, and also like music too, can be interesting, but also has its own challenges. Like translating that to interactive inputs can be like limiting sometimes too. It's hard to find ways to make that truly surprising. So yeah, it's always a challenge. I don't know, for me, like keeping myself feeling like things are fresh. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on this?
Well, I was just thinking on that topic. You also have to be kind of careful about actual randomness versus perceived randomness, because actual randomness is usually pretty ugly and um, like difficult to look at in a lot of different ways. Like the difference between something slowly pulsing to between white and black versus just randomly switching between them is like one is painful, one could be interesting. Um, so that's also interesting. Trying to like find that. I think you kind of mentioned the balance, like
Yeah.
between like sort of like aesthetic and randomness.
Yeah, for me, it's all like, how far removed is it really? Like, if you have just like random white noise, it's literally that. It's like static, right? But if you take each of those points and you like let that control, even like you were talking about pulsing, it's like if it's controlling an LFO frequency, suddenly now like maybe you have something that's moving in patterns and waves and things, and so it's like, yeah, how to take that and like shepherd it, right? That's also the term I brought. It's like how do you channel that into your work? And I think some of my like favorite like generative artists who might be working in like processing or something, like find ways of like taking sort of random seeds and creating all of these works that clearly are the same work, right? You look at them and you're like, this is all the same, but each one is different in the way that like it expresses the shapes and the forms and the composition and the color. And that's what I think like is interesting. It's like, you say like, well, I don't know, there's these kind of questions about like I think I'm trying to articulate this, but like I think the best example was this bot someone created on Thingiverse. Are you anyone familiar? I can't remember the name of the bot, but it basically would go through all of the public domain, or like all the 3D models that people listed as like under the Creative Commons license, and would like download a few different 3D models and then create these like abstract sculptures and then re-upload them under the same license with like a random name or something. And it caused like a controversy because some people saw it as like poetry and other people felt like they were getting like their work was getting like ruined by this bot. And like, and there's this question of like, well, who's making the art now? Like the person who write the bot, is the bot the art? Is the art that the bot's creating the art? Like, who's the artist in this situation, right? I mean, I still think it's the person who wrote the bot, but like it's still this kind of like funny question about, I don't know, like randomness in art and ownership and like, I don't know. I should find that example because it's kind of like brilliant. But yeah.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I personally had a bit of like an existential crisis on a music video project I worked on a while back, where my contribution was, making and training a generative adversarial network that reinterpreted, nature images to produce the imagery that we used for the video. And it was like, even having had experience with generative art where I'm giving lots of control to the computer, it still felt like I didn't actually make it because I kind of gave this other thing some input and it produced some output. And it was, so my existential crisis was trying to decide what like the credit is for that. Like, am I the artist? Like, what do I list myself as for having like helped this, machine learning algorithm do its thing? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and that's also another level too. Like, I honestly have only dabbled very lightly into like AI and GANs and machine learning. For I don't know, for various reasons, it's like less in my wheelhouse, and I've had plenty of other things to do. But yeah, totally weird because it's like, what happens when you start building GANs that develop GANs, right? Like, like what happens when then you build like a bot that like something that spits out. Or I posted the link, by the way, in the chat if you want to see. It's called Shiv Integer was the name of the bot. It's pretty funny and interesting. But yeah, kind of crazy questions.
I wanted to ask about this idea of like randomness feeling somewhat organic. I'm trying to understand like what exactly do you target with your work? Like, are you trying to get something that's, because we have this idea of this impression of like there's a certain randomness that comes with doing something by hand, right? Because you can't inherently recreate something, so there's always going to be an offset. So I'm wondering if the goal with with generative art is, at least specifically with your work, I'm wondering if the goal is to kind of emulate that inherent randomness of trying to create something, or is it trying to find a kind of new randomness altogether?
Yeah, I guess it's funny to be asked like what the goal of my work is, because I'm just like, well, it's like what I make. I like doing it, but no, I think for me, like the interest really is, I don't know. There's a certain point where I like kept getting stuck in my creative process in code. I kept like having too narrow of a vision, and I would make it and I'd be like unhappy with it, with like interactive work and things like that. And I kind of came to this idea like, okay, if I can find ways to like surprise myself, this idea of like, if I can find ways to surprise myself in my work, that will be the way that it can be surprising to other people too, and interesting to other people. It's like, if you don't love your work and if you don't find it to be interesting, like those are the first steps to expect anybody to like your work as well, right? And you have to like your music, you have to like your work. That's at least my sort of philosophy. And so yeah, I think it's been kind of like, especially with the daily sketches, it's like you do iterative processes too, and so it's kind of also a way to like channel your own interests in like an organic way. And I think it also comes from, you kind of mentioned like, drawing by hand, which is something I also like have done a lot too, is like pen and ink drawing and things like that, and like finding ways of like coating the outside of a pen with ink and using that to make like rolling textures, and just like experimenting as like a process. And I think like liking that kind of unpredictability in my like tangible art and music, and like doing free improvisation, for instance, was something that I did for a lot, like kind of out of like musically. And so I don't know, it all kind of comes together for me. Being really interested in like the natural world too, and like just someone who can like look at like a tree for a while if I choose to, and be like, that's really like, look at that one and how it branches differently than this one, and like they're really their own thing, like they're the same but different. Those kinds of things get me. And so it's just like when I'm making art with a computer, which is something I also just like really enjoy doing, how can I get at that natural, like organic sort of quality? Not all the time. I do plenty of things that are like, feel like they're cyberpunk, like Matrix kind of things, or, like whatever, just like the black and white world of generative art. But yeah, I think that like, I don't know, it's just like a different channel too within the like you said, like kind of like a new randomness. It's like a new way of making something. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I was a little rambly and disorganized, but
No, it does. Thanks. Thank you.
yeah. Cool. Yeah. Other thoughts while we're on the topic?
In terms of your interactive work, have you ever seen a user do something that really surprised you?
I gotta think about like an example now. I mean, I think definitely yes, but I'm just kind of lack of like.
Random people are the best QA testers.
Yeah, it's more often than not, it's like people who break something. That's really like what I remember. I think that one thing that's really great is like when kids interact with your work. They're the ones who like do the stuff that like surprise me the most. And do the things that I'm like, oh, I didn't expect someone to do that. And it can be as simple as like you like program it to like the main interaction space to be like where you would say like be able to see the screen. And then like in our tech house, you'll see like a kid like walk around the perimeter and they'll be being tracked or something, they'll see their silhouette on the wall. But I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. I didn't think about like what it would be like if you were like interacting close to the wall, because I wouldn't do that if I went into that space, those kinds of things are always interesting. Kids will also like, I think it's both like kids and also like people who are just like slammed out of their minds at like electronic music festivals are the ones that do the things that I don't expect. Like Pisces Pool, which is really the only example where I was at one of these spaces, you would get people who were just like staring at it for way too long and just like, or like slamming their hands on it. And you're like, that's not doing anything. But so those kinds of things are interesting, I think, and just like perplexing sometimes. And yeah, I think like also I did one, I don't have like the documentation, but it's pretty similar to